Hey there folks, welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And today we're going to be talking about the newest album from Jason Aldean, titled Old Boots, New Dirt. Gotta be honest, I haven't exactly been looking forward to doing this review. Now some of you are probably sitting back and scratching your heads and wondering, wait a minute, this is Jason Aldean, one of the biggest country stars in the industry right now. He's on the A-list. And not only that, he did it by not grafting himself to a major label, instead sticking with his artistic roots on the indie label Broken Bow Records. And he's a major success for nearly a decade now with massive sales and a humongous fan base. And yeah, all that's completely true. And yet, Jason Aldean has never really been a country star that has interested me or impressed me, even at his absolute best. Even though he's on an independent label, he uses the same Nashville songwriting machine that many of his major label counterparts do. And with his thinner voice halfway between Eric Church and Brantley Gilbert, I wasn't really immediately gripped by him as a singer, even though I did like some of the rougher edges on some of his earlier production. It didn't help matters that he tended to have some really poor choice from singles. His biggest off his debut album was Why, which paired a pretty decent melody with a self-aggrandizing message of why he treats his girlfriend like garbage, and honestly kind of felt like he was making excuses for it. He hit a stronger side with the southern rock tinged Johnny Cash, but it's on that song where my other major issue with a lot of Jason Aldean's work managed to surface. His production always seemed a little bit flat and colorless to me. Not his melodic compositions, those are often pretty damn good, but his guitar tones, they always felt a little bit dreary, especially with Jason Aldean's real lack of a sense of humor. It definitely did not help matters that as the 2000s came to a close, Jason Aldean fell in with a lot of the southern pandering with songs like Flyover States that, I gotta admit, those always set my teeth on edge. I really don't like that song. And then came 2010's My Kind of Party, and the song that would redefine Jason Aldean's career for the worse. Dirt Road Anthem, a slow-paced slog of a country rap song that featured Ludacris near the tail end of his commercial success and relevance, and Jason Aldean rapping with no energy or passion whatsoever. A song that managed to land on my list of the top 10 worst hit songs of 2011. Yeah, his duet with Kelly Clarkson, Don't You Wanna Stay, was good enough, but as Jason Aldean got bigger, his songs and public persona got a lot less likable. 2012's Night Train brought in more aggressive and macho country rap-inspired tracks like the Luke Bryan and Eric Church collaboration, The Only Way I Know, and the absolute atrocity of a song in 1994. And while songs like Night Train felt sincere and catered well to Jason Aldean's female fan base, they did not really stand out for me, I'm sorry. And combined with a recent Billboard magazine cover story that only seemed to highlight his aggressive frustration for being one of the acts that responsible for triggering all the elements of bro country that pissed me off, the macho posturing, the bad rapping, the inert rock-inspired production, basically a country-flavored brand of hair metal minus the cheesiness or fun or shredding riffs, I gotta be honest, I didn't have a really good picture of the guy. And yet, with Burning It Down, the opening single from Jason Aldean's newest album, Old Boots and New Dirt, I didn't know what to expect for this new record, so while I did not expect to like this album, I figured at least he was gonna be trying something different. It'd be an interesting album to talk about, right? Well, some extent it is, because I gotta admit this was the album that nearly won me over on Jason Aldean. I'm not kidding when I said that I was way more conflicted about this release than I expected to be. I did not expect to like this album, but there was a lot about Jason Aldean on this album to like, and I definitely understand his appeal now. At the same time, my issues with Jason Aldean haven't exactly gone away, and it leaves me feeling really unsure whether or not I should recommend this album to you all, one way or the other. So okay, let's start with the instrumentation and the production. And remember in my last review, the Blake Shelton one, where I said I wasn't really against more synthetic elements creeping into country music if it had been done right? Well, this album pushed me to the absolute limit here, because in pushing that bro country rock vibe, it wasn't long before the drum machines, watery filtered guitars, and vocal effects began pushing all my buttons in the worst possible way. Now, Jason Aldean's credit, he's better at making them feel cohesive with the harder, almost blues rock inspired electric guitars and the steel guitar and the welcome organ that crops up all over the album. And there are definitely points where he gets that more spacious, steel guitar accented vibe pretty well, like on Tonight Looks Good on You. And this highlights the one thing I can definitely say I appreciate about Jason Aldean. He always picks songs with a strong melodic foundation that don't start sounding similar to each other or altogether too simple melodically. And he's not afraid to inject some pretty solid guitar solos into his material to add it more flavor. And with songs like Show You Off, the distinctly country Too Fast, the bass and organ heavy If My My Truck Could Talk, or the groove-driven I Took It With Me. There's a pretty solid rock vibe to several of these songs that I did like. And with Don't Change Gone, Jason Aldean nailed a very compelling power ballad and the easy album standout. Best song on the album. We'll come back to it. And I'll give it to Jason Aldean. He never really relies on drum machines entirely for his songs, and you can always guarantee that real drumming will kick in. Hell, halfway through the album, the drum machines and the synthesizers pretty much leave this album entirely, because honestly, it feels like the electronic elements feel tacked on to add that pop crossover hit. And that's one of the reasons why Burning It Down feels so awkward and stilted, because it does not feel like it fits on the rest of this album. At the same time though, I wish Jason Aldean pushed the country rock angle a little harder, or maybe more towards blues rock, because maybe it's an issue with the production, but it's rare that the guitar tones have enough fiery power to back up a lot of the rock star posturing going on in this album, always coming across as weirdly inert to me at best or painfully underweight at worst. This either comes through in a lack of potent bass lines or real explosive guitar texture, which characterized a lot of the hard rock that both Jason Aldean and I loved growing up. Although, while I preferred on the hair metal side Whitesnake and Van Halen, you can tell he liked a lot more of Bon Jovi and Guns N' Roses. Now, granted, for as much as Jason Aldean draws a lot of influence from acts like Guns N' Roses, it really doesn't come across in the one element that I do wish it would: his vocals. Now, let me stress that I completely get why Jason Aldean's big female fan base really loves him, and it's probably one of the most striking factors about him. He takes his work seriously, and while he does have reserve and places distance between himself and the audience, you can tell that he's trying to show a lot of emotional range and really invest in his material. You can tell he cares about what he puts out, and I can respect that. And that's what makes his songs focused on relationships, particularly the troubled ones, work pretty effectively, because he's capable of selling an investment, even if he can lack some warmth in his delivery. But that lack of humor or levity can also be a major downside on tracks where he's trying to have a ruckus party, because he doesn't sound like he's having any fun, and that's why there's no sense of populism to those songs. Take Laid Back, a song where Jason Aldean is trying to call together a party way back in the 6th, and it comes across very calculated and stiff, especially when he mentions in the chorus to tell everyone you know to come to this party. Or take the song Gonna Know We Were Here, a song that goes for rock star flames and firebranding outlaws, and yet Jason Aldean sings it so seriously that when you get lyrics like "You got the gas, I got the matches, we're gonna turn this town to ashes," you start to wonder with his delivery whether or not he means it literally. Of course he doesn't, but even with that, his voice is still very much vintage country. It doesn't have a rock edge or a bite or grit to it, which means he tends to come across best on smoother country tracks, or even when you inject hints of a blues element, that kind of works too, because it honestly comes across as a pretty solid fit for him. I wish he went more in that direction. Now all this circles back to the lyrics, which are arguably the least interesting thing about this album. I will say this for Jason Aldean, he at least has the dignity to avoid the sort of lyrical embarrassments that plagued Blake Shelton's last album, but that doesn't mean I haven't heard some of his brand of bro country before in terms of structure or delivery, because let's be honest, you can swap out Sweet Little Something, Laid Back, Just Getting Started, Show You Off, and chunks of Tonight Looks Good on You and I Took It With Me for most other bro country tracks lyrically that I've heard thus far this year, and it wouldn't make that much of a difference, and that's a problem. And for as sexy as Jason Aldean is trying to make Burning It Down sound, it's somewhat undercut by when he references listening to some old Alabama. Because keep in mind, this was the band that performed the obscenely religious Angels Among Us, complete with child choirs. Not really sure that's the mood you want when getting down, Jason Aldean, and I gotta be honest, I really don't like it when Jason Aldean plays his self-aware bad boy, because the writing never quite nails that tricky balance or proper framing, and those tracks can come across as self-aggrandizing and making a lot of bad excuses. And then there's the song Too Fast, a bit of an odd track to include on this album, because there's so much rock star posturing going on, because that song's like the complete rejection of all of it, in favor of settling down and slowing down. And while that song is quite good, it just kind of feels out of place on this album, that's all. But I will say this in Jason Aldean's favor, he does have some really nuanced songs on this album. Trying to Love Me places him in an apologetic role as he finally is able to communicate with his girl, and you can tell there's a lot of real sincerity behind it. If My Truck Could Talk continues the trend of vehicles talking from Kenny Chesney's album earlier this year, but Aldean plays the song straight as it's an acknowledgement of the bad things he's done and really can't deny at this point, and how he fills the chorus with statements of how he'd get rid of his truck and cover his ass. It'd be the kind of demolition that would be genuinely painful for him given his connection to his vehicle, and Jason Aldean sells it like that. I gotta admit, it worked for me. Old Boots, New Dirt, and I Took It With Me play the journeyman musician card, and it mostly works, mostly to get over broken relationships or show homage to his home, and in that tradition they work pretty effectively. And Miss That Girl cuts straight to the chase and isn't afraid to implicate Jason Aldean as the reason why the relationship failed. But without a doubt, Don't Change Gone is the most potent and the best track on this album, bar none. Hitting that kernel of frustration and real grief that he's struggling to deal with, for which he doesn't really have an answer. It's a sort of real drama that has anchored some of my favorite country songs and albums this year, and for one brief moment on this album, Jason Aldean really gets it. The song blew me out of the water, might even be one of my favorites thus far this year. We'll have to see how well it ages. So in the end, Old Boots, New Dirt is a sort of country record I don't so much like as I do respect. The melodies are strong, the songwriting can have nuance, and while there are definitely problems in the production, I get now why Jason Aldean is a member of country music's A-list. He definitely has more control on his artistic direction than most, and while the majority of his more electronic experiments, they do fall flat, he definitely makes up for it on the back half of this album, and he has a certain consistency to his material that, you know what, I can kind of respect. And really, many of the issues I take with him are really my issues and my preferences for country music, and I can accept that. So in the end, yeah, I'm gonna recommend Jason Aldean's Old Boots, New Dirt, and I'm gonna give it a strong 6 out of 10. If you're a fan of mainstream accessible country music with some blues and rock flavors, this album, it's worth a listen. And it's a sign that Jason Aldean, he's actually on the road of winning me over after all. And that's something I never could have thought. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. If you'd like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. If there's anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation, or any other albums coming out that you want me to take a look at, I'm more than happy to give them a listen. Until then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.